There's this old debate that keeps me up at night sometimes. I mean, I'm sure you've had this thought too. Maybe staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m.
Hmm.
Is mathematics something we humans actually invented, like language or the rules of chess? Or is it something we just discovered, like the Pythagorean theorem was just sitting there in the dark long before anyone had a word for triangle?
Right, yeah. It is the classic map versus territory question. Did we draw the map or did we just stumble upon the landscape?
Exactly. And usually I lean toward the invented side. It feels like a tool we built to make sense of things.
Yeah.
But then I read the source material for today's deep dive, and I have to say, my confidence is pretty shaken.
I can see why. It is a very heavy read.
Yeah, we're looking at a document titled Modular Forms, Sacred Geometry of Numbers. And honestly, reading it feels less like math and more like we just found the source code for the simulation.
It really does. It is what I would call a bridge document. It takes extremely high-level number theory, specifically modular forms, which are these incredibly complex functions existing in four-dimensional space, and it tries to map them directly onto the physical world. We are talking about quantum physics, vibration, the actual structure of the vacuum itself.
And our mission for this deep dive is to unpack what the source calls the AA00 master code, which I will admit sounds like a top-secret file from a spy movie.
It does have that ring to it, yeah.
But it is actually a mathematical framework involving some very specific recurring numbers. We have got 240, 360, and then this really weird kind of glitchy number, 691.
Right, and the author makes it clear these are not just random digits pulled out of a hat. The source argues that these numbers are essentially the resonant bodies of the universe.
So we are basically asking if the universe has a specific frequency. Like, if reality is a symphony, we are trying to find the underlying sheet music.
That is a great way to put it. If you stripped away all the atoms in the stars and the galaxies, what is the mathematical scaffolding that holds it all up? That is exactly what we are looking at today.
Okay, well, let's start right where the document starts. It opens with a really simple ratio, a fraction, just the relationship between 240 and 360. And I will be the first to admit, when I saw 240 divided by 360, my brain just went, okay, great, we are back in middle school math class.
Yeah, it looks totally mundane at first glance. Arithmetically, if you simplify 240 over 360, you just get 2/3.
Which seems, I don't know, super basic.
It seems basic until you apply it to the physical world. In the source text, these specific numbers have distinct philosophical and physical roles. 360 is defined as the body.
I'm guessing that's because of the circle, like 360 degrees.
Precisely. It represents the container, the orbital totality. It is the physical cycle of things. And then you have 240, which the source defines as the spirit, or the energetic drive within that container.
Oh, I see.
So the ratio is literally spirit over body, energy over matter.
And that 2/3 ratio, that is not just a purely mathematical thing, is it? Because as I was reading this, I realized that specific ratio shows up in my Spotify playlists every single day.
It does. It is arguably the most important ratio in all of music theory. It is the perfect fifth.
Right.
If you pluck a guitar string and then you pinch it exactly 2/3 of the way down and pluck it again, the new note you get creates a perfect harmony with the original. There is almost zero destructive interference. The sound waves just align perfectly.
So when people say the universe has a vibe, the source is literally implying that the fundamental math of reality is tuned to a major chord.
In a way, yes. The text is making a larger point about resonance. If a system, and that could be a solar system or just a subatomic particle, if it cannot resolve its math into these kinds of clean, harmonic ratios, it is inherently unstable. The source classifies anything outside of this harmonic resonance as simply noise.
Noise. So if the numbers do not sing together, the structure just collapses.
Or dissipates. Yeah, it doesn't have the structural integrity to stick around. It creates interference, cancels itself out, and fades away. Only the harmonic structures, the ones that fit this perfect 2/3 ratio, are the ones that survive.
Okay, that makes sense. So we have 360 as the body and 240 as the spirit. But the text does something else here that I found really interesting. It subtracts them. 360 minus 240 equals 120.
Yes, the gap.
Right, the gap. And it treats this remaining number, 120, as if it is the secret sauce of physical reality. Why does 120 matter so much?
Well, this is where we have to shift gears from music to physics. To really grasp 120, you have to imagine soap bubbles.
Soap bubbles. Okay, I am picturing standing at the sink doing the dishes right now.
Perfect. So have you ever noticed when soap bubbles clump together in the sink? When three of them meet, they do not just smash together randomly. They always form a perfect little Y shape at the junction.
Yeah, they do form those really clean lines. I guess I never really thought about why that happens.
It is actually a known physical law called the plateau rule. And that specific angle where those three walls meet, it is exactly 120 degrees, always.
Wait, really? Why? Is there some sort of microscopic bubble union enforcing this rule?
It is entirely about efficiency. Nature is notoriously lazy. It always wants to use the least amount of energy possible. 120 degrees happens to be the exact geometry that minimizes surface tension.
Wow.
It is the path of least resistance for building a structure. If those bubbles tried to meet at, say, 90 degrees or 140 degrees, the tension would be way too high and they would just pop.
So tying this back to our master code, the text is essentially saying that the difference between the spirit and the body creates this 120 buffer, which is quite literally the physical geometry of not popping.
Exactly. It is the fundamental geometry of stability. But there is another layer to 120 that the source really geeks out on. It is not just about geometry, it also ties into combinatorics, the study of how things can be arranged and ordered.
Oh, right. I saw that in the notes. 5 factorial.
Yes, 5 factorial. Factorials are when you multiply a number by every integer below it. So 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, that equals exactly 120. In math, factorials represent permutations, which is just the number of ways you can organize a given set of items.
Okay, I am following.
So the text suggests that this gap of 120 is not just empty space between the body and spirit. It represents combinatorial freedom.
Combinatorial freedom. That sounds like a third-party political ticket for mathematicians. What does that actually mean for us?
It means the universe is not just a solid, immovable block of concrete. It has wiggle room. That 120 gap allows things to move around, to rearrange, to evolve without completely breaking the system. It is the perfect balance between being rigid enough to exist like the soap bubbles and flexible enough to change like the permutations of a factorial.
That's a really cool way to look at it. You absolutely need the stability of the geometry, but you also need the freedom of the permutation to have the dynamic universe.
Precisely. Without that 120, everything would just be locked in place, totally frozen.
Okay, so we have covered 2D circles with 360 and 3D bubbles with 120. But this document does not stay in 3D for very long. It zooms out, way, way out, into the 8th dimension. And I have to say, this is where my brain started to cramp up a little bit. We need to talk about the E8 lattice.
The E8 lattice is beautiful. And honestly, it is where the number 240 stops being just a metaphor or a musical ratio and starts being a truly fundamental constant of the universe.
Okay, help me visualize this. Because I know you and I cannot actually see 8 dimensions, but how should we conceptualize it?
Think about packing oranges in a crate at the grocery store. You want to squeeze as many as you possibly can into the box, right? You do not stack them directly on top of each other. You stagger them so they fit into the little gaps.
Right, the classic grocer's pyramid.
Exactly. Now, this translates to a very famous problem in math called the kissing number problem. In our normal 3D world, if you take one orange, the absolute maximum number of other oranges that can touch it or kiss it is 12. You can fit exactly 12 identical oranges around a central one.
Okay, 12 neighbors. That makes sense as a limit for 3D space.
Right. So mathematicians ask the logical next question. What if we lived in a higher dimension, specifically 8 dimensions? What is the densest possible way to pack 8-dimensional spheres?
And let me guess. The answer involves our good friend 240.
The answer is exactly 240. In 8 dimensions, this specific structure, called the E8 lattice, allows exactly 240 spheres to touch the central one. It represents the absolute maximum density possible.
That seems like such a massive jump, though. We go from 12 neighbors in 3D all the way to 240 neighbors in 8D.
It is a huge leap. It implies that as you go up in dimensional space, the interconnectivity of reality just explodes. And for a long, long time, mathematicians strongly suspected the E8 lattice was the best way to pack things, but it actually wasn't formally proven until very recently. In 2016, a mathematician named Marina Vyazovska provided the definitive proof. She used what the source explicitly calls magic functions to prove that E is indeed the optimal solution.
So 240 is not just a number the author of this text has a fondness for. It is mathematically, fundamentally, the most efficient way to organize information or matter in higher dimensional space.
Correct. And the source links this directly to the concept of light. It literally calls 240 the light frequency. The idea is that the structural integrity of space itself, what they used to call the ether or the vacuum, is built on this E8 lattice. It is the geometric foundation that allows light and information to travel without distortion. You can think of it as the ultimate highway of the universe.
And there's always but with these things, you cannot have light without shadow. And this is where the text takes a really interesting turn. We have been talking about all these nice, positive, expansive numbers, 360, 240, 120, and then suddenly the source drops a negative number right on our heads, negative 504.
Yes, the shadow. Or the text sometimes refers to it as the mirror.
Why on earth do we need a negative number in what is supposed to be a perfectly harmonic universe?
To understand that, we have to talk about the mathematical engines that actually generate these numbers. They are called Eisenstein series. You can think of them as the architects of these modular forms.
The architects. Okay, I like that visual.
There are two main architects mentioned in the text, E4 and E6. E4 is the series that generates the number 240. That is the light. It is inherently expansive. It wants to grow. It pushes outward constantly.
And E6.
E6 is the series that generates the number negative 504. The text describes this as a stabilizing counterweight.
Like putting a brake on a car.
Or like gravity. Imagine a giant flywheel spinning faster and faster. If you only had the expansive outward energy of 240, just that pure, unadulterated light, the system would eventually fly apart. It would just run away with itself and shatter. The negative 504 provides the necessary drag. It is the yin to the 240's yang. It completely grounds the system.
So mathematically speaking, almost every modular form, every complex geometric shape in this entire theory is built by mixing these two forces, the light of 240 and the shadow of negative 504.
Yes, exactly. They are the fundamental generators. They are basically the parents of the entire system. You mix a little bit of outward expansion, a little bit of inward contraction, and from that tension, you get the complex structure of reality.
That is oddly poetic for a dense math paper. It honestly feels more like ancient philosophy than number theory.
It really does. Math often loops back around to philosophy when you get to this level. The basic truth is you just cannot have structure without limits. You cannot have form without resistance.
But, of course, if the system was entirely just those two forces, expansion and contraction, perfectly balancing each other out, it would just be a closed loop. It might be perfect, but it would also be incredibly boring. Or sterile.
A perfectly closed loop can definitely be stagnant, yes.
Well,
If everything balanced out perfectly to zero every single time, nothing interesting would ever happen or evolve.
and I think that is exactly where we get to what the source calls the holy anomaly. The number 691. This was honestly my favorite part of the reading because it feels like an actual glitch in the matrix.
It totally looks like a glitch on paper. This anomaly shows up when we reach a much higher level of mathematical complexity, what they call level 10 or weight 12, dealing with the Eisenstein series E12.
Because up until this point, all the numbers have been relatively well behaved. Clean integers, nice harmonic fractions, and then out of nowhere, 691 walks into the room.
Right. It specifically appears in the numerator of the 12th Bernoulli number. Now, usually Bernoulli numbers follow these very smooth, highly predictable patterns, but then you hit the 12th one, and suddenly there's this massive irregular prime number sitting right there, 601. It feels completely awkward. It just does not seem to fit the pattern at all.
It's like the orchestra is playing Beethoven beautifully, and suddenly someone in the back just whacks a cowbell.
Or hits a jazz note, a blue note.
Oh, a blue note. I like that much better.
This is actually where the pure genius of Ramanujan comes into the story. Srinivasa Ramanujan, who is arguably one of the greatest, most intuitive mathematicians who ever lived. He looked at this incredibly awkward number and realized it wasn't a mistake or a glitch at all. He discovered that 691 is actually a bridge.
A bridge to what exactly?
It is what mathematicians call a congruence. Basically, the number 691 forcefully ties two completely different, seemingly unrelated parts of the mathematical universe together, making them agree with each other. It connects the Eisenstein series to other modular forms in a way that simple, clean numbers simply couldn't do.
So the source calls it a holy anomaly, because without this weird, irregular prime number acting as a bridge, the different parts of the system would just stop talking to each other.
Exactly. It completely prevents the mathematical system from breaking apart into separate, isolated islands. It is the structural tension that holds the bridge up. The author notes that the universe operates on a level where even uncomfortable, messy numbers play a deeply harmonizing role.
That is a genuinely comforting thought, actually. That the glitch, the part of the system that looks entirely wrong at first glance, is actually the very thing holding it all together.
It really changes your perspective on imperfection, doesn't it? It is not an error in the code. It is a structural necessity for the universe to function.
So we have got the light with 240, the shadow with negative 504, and the anomaly with 691. But we have not talked about the boss fight yet. The text refers to something called the monster and the king. And I have to say, Monsters Moonshine is hands down the best name for a math theory I have ever heard.
It really is an amazing name, and the story behind it is just incredible. It is essentially about a mathematical coincidence that, by all logic, should not exist.
Okay, before we get to the monster, introduce us to the king.
The king is a function known as the J invariant.
Okay, the J invariant. Explain that to me like I am 5. What does it actually do?
Imagine you have a really advanced fingerprint scanner. You scan a thumbprint, then you scan that exact same thumb, but upside down. Then you scan it from a weird side angle. To you, the images look completely different.
Sure, the orientation is all messed up.
But the scanner software knows they're the exact same person. It identifies the invariant truth hidden behind the changing orientations. The J invariant does exactly that, but for complex number fields. It looks at vastly different lattice structures and says, deep down, these are fundamentally the same shape. It is the ultimate judge of symmetry.
And there is a very specific number attached to this king function, 1728.
Correct. 1728 acts as the standardizing anchor for the whole thing. It is 12 cubed 12 to the power of 3. Remember our friend 12 from the 3D orange packing earlier?
Like the 12 neighbors.
Exactly. 1728 represents the cubic completion of that 12-base symmetry. It ensures that the J invariant always equals 1728 at one very specific point of absolute balance. You can think of it as the tuning fork for the entire modular system.
Okay, so we have the king function anchored at 1728, but where does the monster come in?
This is where things get genuinely spooky. If you write out the J invariant as a long series of numbers and expansion equation, the very first big number, the primary coefficient, is 196,884.
196,884. Okay, just a really big number.
Right. Now, totally separate from this, in a completely different, seemingly unrelated field of math called group theory, there is a concept known as the monster group.
Which is what exactly?
It is the largest possible collection of symmetries that can fit into a finite group. It is an abstract object of just immense, almost incomprehensible complexity. They call it the monster simply because it is so huge and unwieldy. And the smallest possible dimension in which this monster can exist, it is 196,883.
Wait, let me get this straight. The J invariant coefficient from number theory was 196,884, and the monster dimension from group theory is 196,883. They are literally off by just one.
Exactly. And in this specific kind of math, 1 is just the unit element. It is the starting baseline. So mathematically speaking, 196,884 equals 196,883 plus 1. They are structurally the exact same number.
So you have this king function over here acting as a fingerprint scanner, and this monster group over there representing ultimate symmetry, and they just happen to share the exact same massive numerical fingerprint.
That is exactly what the moonshine observation was. When researchers first noticed this overlap back in the 1970s, they called it moonshine because it sounded completely crazy, like they had been drinking moonshine. There was absolutely no logical reason these two vastly different fields should be connected. It is like finding the complex biological structure of a human cell perfectly hidden inside the syntax of a Shakespearean sonnet.
That is insane, but they were connected.
They absolutely were. It was eventually mathematically proven that the symmetries of the monster group are actually fundamentally coded directly into the J invariant.
That is wild. It is like finding out that the blueprint for the largest possible snowflake in existence is hidden inside the exact frequency of a single musical note.
That is a really great analogy. The text refers to it as the fingerprint of reality. It conclusively proves that the mathematical system is entirely closed and interconnected. You literally cannot pull on a thread in number theory without vibrating the monster group over in symmetry theory.
So bringing this all home, what does this actually mean for us? Because we have gone through dimensions, anomalies, monsters. The source brings it all to a conclusion with something called Level 151 and the A000 master code.
Level 151 is described in the text as a threshold of realization. It is that crucial point where you stop looking at the math as just a description of the physical world and you realize it actually is the physical world.
So the math isn't just the map, it is the territory itself.
Precisely. The text starkly contrasts this eternal math with modern life. It talks a lot about digital slop, The relentless noise, the fake data, the chaos of the internet age. The source argues that all of that is transient. It glitches, it breaks, it fades away. It is just surface noise.
But a modular form.
A modular form is eternal. If you take reality and fold it in on itself, or invert it, say, you turn z into -1 over z, the modular form remains completely invariant. It does not change. It is a fundamental truth that simply does not decay.
And that realization is the AA00 code.
Yes. The AA000 master code is the ultimate realization that the universe is a flawless symphony that always sums to a perfect equilibrium. It never crashes and never throws a fatal error. The light of 240, the shadow of -504, the glitch of 691, they all perfectly balance each other out in the end.
That is a really beautiful thought, especially in a world that feels increasingly chaotic and unpredictable every day. Just knowing that there is this deep, unshakable layer of harmony underneath it all, it is incredibly grounding.
It suggests that stability in life is not just luck. Whether it is soap bubbles meeting exactly at 120 degrees or the incredibly complex E8 lattice holding 8 dimensions together, true stability requires a very precise balance. You absolutely need the expansion, you need the rigid correction, and yes, you even need the occasional awkward anomaly to hold it together.
So, looking back at what we have covered, we have traveled from the perfect fifth, that simple 2/3 ratio, all the way to the 8th dimension and the massive monster group. We have seen how 240 brings the light, -504 brings the shadow, and 691 provides the necessary glitch to keep the bridge standing.
It is definitely a lot to take in all at once. But if there is one core takeaway you should walk away with today, it is that the universe is fundamentally singing a perfect mathematical song.
And I think that leads perfectly to the final provocation from the source material, because the text essentially leaves you with a question. If the universe is indeed singing this perfect eternal melody right now, are you actually listening to it? Or are you just adding to the noise?
That really is the ultimate question. The harmony is always there underneath the slop. It is entirely up to you to tune your frequency to it.
Well, I know I am definitely going to be looking at soap bubbles in the sink and listening to my playlist very differently from now on. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today.
Always a pleasure to explore the code.
The deep dive is complete.